Y'all look ready. Let's go. All right, 2 Corinthians chapter 8. 2 Corinthians chapter 8. That's where we'll be beginning the new material. Anybody remember where 2 Corinthians is written from? Macedonia. Very good. So you remember that on Paul's third missionary journey, he makes his way through the churches of Galatia, comes over to Ephesus. How long is he going to spend in Ephesus? 3 years. And one of the epistles that he writes from there is going to be 1 Corinthians. And so he writes to the church at Corinth a letter dealing with a lot of rebuke. And he's concerned about how they received that. Now, shortly after writing that letter, there was an uproar in the city of Athens over Paul's teaching about that, particularly the goddess Diana was not really a god. And so there was an uproar. And very shortly after that, he left and he goes up to Troas, hoping to find Titus, who apparently was the one who delivered the letter of 1 Corinthians. And he doesn't find Titus, so he still doesn't know how that letter was received. He continues on up from Troas up to Macedonia. And there in Macedonia, he meets with Titus, and Titus tells him that the Corinthians received the letter well, and that they have responded well to much of the rebuke that Paul gave them. There were some corrections made in a number of areas, but there were still some other problems that needed to be dealt with. So he writes off the second letter of 2 Corinthians, and the first thing that he deals with in the first two chapters is why he changed his plans. Because in the first letter, he said, I hope to come to you very soon, and hope to come this direction, and he didn't do that. And he explains why he didn't do that. Does anybody remember the main reason that he gives? Why didn't he come earlier? He didn't want to come and them not be prepared for him. So he was giving them time to make those corrections before he came. In chapters 3 through 7, he talks about his work as a minister of the gospel and clarifies some of that, dealing with a number of other issues. And now we get down to chapters 8 and 9, where he comes back to some instruction that he gave them in 1 Corinthians chapter 16. Does anybody remember 1 Corinthians chapter 16, the first few verses, what that instruction was? What? Now concerning the collection of the saints. As I'd given orders to the churches in Galatia, I'm telling you to do also on the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by and store that there be no gatherings when I come. So he gave that instruction to them, and now he comes back to that, and he wants to talk to them a little bit more about that. Because some time has passed, at least over a year probably has passed at this point, and they had initial enthusiasm about that. They wanted to be part of that. They were excited about it. You ever had a good work that someone brings up and you're like, man, I'd like to be part of that. That sounds good. Yeah, whenever you get around to that, you let me know because I want to help out. And then some time passes and the time comes up and says, hey, you remember we talked about that? Yeah, I do. Sure do. Well, I'm about to get started on that. Are you ready to help? And what's your attitude about it now? Oh, man, well, I'm pretty busy right now. This is a tough time of year for me right now. And I don't know if I can make that happen right now. And Paul's afraid that's what's happening with the Corinthians. They were excited about it initially, but like with a lot of things, that excitement can fade, and he wants to make sure they're going to follow through with it. And so in chapters 8 and 9, he's going to give some instruction about giving. I was talking to Austin about maybe where most practical application can come from in the chapters we're going to cover tonight. And I think that there's a lot of practical application in chapters 8 and 9 about our attitudes towards giving, about what the purpose of giving is, the benefits of giving. And so maybe we'll have time to touch on some of that. Maybe not as much as we would like, but we'll see as we go through there. Anything you want to add before we get going?
Yeah, I think at the end of chapter 7 is worth noting. We mentioned this, but just some of the phrases he used. He talks about the boast he's made in them, and he was not put to shame. And then the very last verse, I rejoice because I have complete confidence in you. And I think that's kind of what he's saying leading into some of the reminders he's going to give them. And I think some of the things he's going to implement in these couple of chapters are going to kind of come out of that idea too.
Paul gives several reasons why he really wants to encourage them to follow through with this. And the first one starts in chapter 8, verse 1. Moreover, brethren, we make known to you the grace of God bestowed upon the churches of Macedonia, that in great trial of affliction, the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded in the riches of their liberality. For I bear them witness, according to their ability, yes, beyond their ability, they were freely willing, imploring us with much urgency that we would receive the gift and the fellowship of the ministry of the saints. And this they did, not as we'd first hoped, but not as we had hoped, but they first gave themselves to the Lord and then to us by the will of the Lord. So he's talking about the churches in Macedonia. How have the churches in Macedonia done about this instruction of the collection of the saints, or this giving? Very well. Were they in a position to be very generous? Not really. They're poor and they're being heavily persecuted. And Paul's almost like, look, y'all don't have to do this. And what's their attitude? No, please let us help with this. Please let us help with this. And I like what it says in verse 5. You know why they had that attitude? What had they first done? They had given themselves to the Lord. We're all in. We are the Lord's. If this is the Lord's work, we're going to be involved in it. And so giving is no problem for a person that's first given themselves. Now, how does he know that the churches of Macedonia have this great, generous attitude? What? He's there right now. He's there right now with them. He knows that because he's writing from Macedonia. And so he's writing to the Corinthians, and he's using the Macedonians as an example to say, man, these guys, they've given themselves to the Lord, and they are wholly into doing whatever the Lord's work has involved for them. And so in verse 7, he ends that by saying, see that you abound in this grace also. I talked to you about the grace that abounds in the Macedonians. You see that you abound in it as well, that you are growing and improving in this, that you have that same generous, liberal giving attitude that they do.
And then you see what he compares this to, right? So look in verse 9. He says, you need to excel in verse 7 in faith and speech and knowledge and earnestness and our love for you, that you see that you excel in this act of grace also. And then in verse 9, he gives something for them to kind of look back to. So what should they be looking back to?
Jesus.
Yeah, Jesus, right? So what does it say about Jesus here? Give me some answers. What does it say about Jesus? He was rich, but he became poor for our sakes, right? So he was rich. What do you think the idea behind that is, that Jesus was rich? Mm-hmm. I say it again. He was in heaven. I mean, he was God. And then he became poor. So what does that mean? He left heaven, became a man. What kind of man? Whose son? Well, he's God's son. But I was thinking, like, as far as earthly son.
A carpenter's.
Carpenter's son. Is that great? Maybe not, right? I mean, it's not like he's a king's son here on earth, right? And so you look at that, it's like he became poor so that you, by his poverty, might become rich. I think what he's trying to show, again, is if you give yourself to God, as the Macedonians did, if you realize what God has done for you, then of course you're going to act in the same kind of way. Of course, you're going to want to excel in this act of grace as well, because if you've given yourself to God and that's how your God acts, that's how you act too. And so then he gets to verse 11. So now maybe it's in verse 10, talking about you started a year ago, not only to do this work, but to desire to do it. Then verse 11, so what should you do now? Finish it, right? Finish the thing you desire to do. And so that your readiness and desiring may be matched by your completing it out of what you have. And so this is something you are desiring to do. It's something that matches up with what God has done for you. Don't fail here at the end whenever this can be completed. Go ahead. Sorry.
I just want to notice something in verse 10. Why is Paul instructing this? For whose benefit? Their advantage. All right, so he could be instructing this, saying, well, the needy saints in Jerusalem or Judea really need this, and so it's for their benefit that I'm instructing you. And he does make that point down in verse 13 and 14. For I do not mean that others should be eased and you burdened, but there be an equality. At the same time, your abundance may supply their lack, and their abundance may supply your lack. With it may be an equality. So there is a sense in which it will be to the benefit and to the advantage of those in Judea, but he may emphasize it's going to be to your advantage. How is it going to be to their advantage? It stores up treasure for them in heaven. This is an investment. You have an investment opportunity right now, and so I want you to be involved in that, and I want you to be able to give in that. And you started this planning a year ago, but make sure that there's a completion of it. So good intentions, is that enough? I wish it was, because I've had a lot of good intentions. I'm going to have them over. I'm going to ask for them if they want to study the Bible. I'm going to send a card to this person. I'm going to do that. And I can probably give you more of those that I haven't done than I have. Lots of good intentions. But that's not where the benefit is. The benefit is in the completion of it.
And you were mentioning, both of y'all, we're talking about the benefit there is spiritually. He also mentions a benefit physically here, right? So the benefit physically is if all Christians are working the way they ought to work together, then you should never really have anybody in need because you will be sacrificing for one another whenever someone has a time of need, then you can supply that and they can supply you. And so I think there is a physical application to this along with the spiritual that at least we can point to. Communism, Christian communism.
Christian communism, yeah. Yeah, the difference of this than communism, and I will make this point, the difference of this than communism is that in communism what you're doing is you are leveling the field regardless. In this what you're doing is you're doing what Christ did, and that those that do have out of love supply for those that can't have. And you're supplying it out of love so that there is a mutual support in the family. And so I think sometimes people read that and it's like, well, I don't think that would work on a political. Well, I don't think it'd work politically either, but it works in a family. And that's what Christians are, as a family. All right. This next section, he's talking about how this is going to be taken care of. And so he makes the point that in verse 18, we have sent with him the brother whose praise is in the gospel throughout all of the churches. And not only that, but who also was chosen by the churches to travel with us, with this gift, which is administered by us to the glory of God himself. And he goes through and he says, avoiding this, verse 20, that anyone should blame us for this lavish gift, which was administered by us, providing honorable things not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. You may remember that in chapter 16 of 1 Corinthians, when he told them to lay by and store, that there be no collections when he comes, he also says that when I come, whoever you approve by your letters, I will send to bear your gift to Jerusalem. And if it's fitting, I will also go, and they will go with me. What is Paul concerned about in this?
Someone could make an accusation against him or those taking up.
Yeah. Can you imagine if I write to 15 different churches and say, hey, I want you, we're gonna send some money over to needy brethren over in Africa. I want you to get a collection together, and I'm going to come by and pick it up. And I go myself to all 15 churches, pick up all of this, and then head to Africa. Would you wonder, I wonder if Lonnie's giving all of that? I mean, hopefully you trust me and you're thinking, yeah. But you notice Paul doesn't even leave that door open. He says, I want someone from your congregation to go with me and take that, because I want to provide things in an honorable way. I don't want any room for accusation to be leveled, because, boy, that could really mess up this whole thing. And so let's make sure that everything is done above board, that everybody is aware of what's going on, that accountability is made so that this is accomplished the way that it's supposed to be accomplished. And I think that there's wisdom in that. I think there's wisdom in that in a lot of ways. In your life as Christians, we need to be wise enough. Harmless as doves, wise as what? Wise as serpents. And the purpose is we don't want to give Satan an advantage on us. I don't want to put myself in a situation where rumors can be started about me in the way that I'm handling the church's money, or the way that I'm spending time with sisters in Christ, or whatever it is. You want things done in a way where it's not easy for someone to make such accusations like that. And so Paul was aware of that. He recognized that. And in this gift, he wanted to be sure that it was done in such a way that everyone felt confident that it was being done honestly and genuinely.
I think it is a preventative measure, but I also think it's in response probably too, because we've seen in other letters, and we'll see here in just a little bit, that there are accusations against Paul. I don't know if you mentioned this, but there are accusations against Paul about wanting notoriety or being greedy. He'll use the word crafty in second, or at least in the ESV uses the word crafty in 2 Corinthians. And so I think that, there are people who are maybe planting that seed in Christians' minds, and he's saying, look, I'm going to make sure that that's not going to be an issue. So I think that's true as well.
Any thoughts, y'all? Have anything you want to add up to this point? All right. One other point about verse 24 before we move into chapter 9. Notice that he says, therefore, show to them and before the churches the proof of your love and of our boasting on your behalf. The proof of their love was their giving. What's the proof of God's love? For God so loved the world that he did what? He gave. He gave his only begotten son. When Abraham, what was the proof of Abraham's love for God? He gave Isaac. He gave Isaac. And I will say this, that the proof of our love will probably be found in giving as well. And so keep that in mind. When you are called upon to give, remember there's an opportunity to say, all right, here's a chance to prove my love. And so I find that verse helpful. All right, chapter 9. Verse 1, now concerning the ministering to the saints, it is superfluous for me to write to you, for I know your willingness, about which I boast of you to the Macedonians, that Achaia was ready a year ago, and your zeal has stirred up the majority. So he goes to Macedonia and he says, hey, let me tell you about the Corinthians. I'll tell you, the Corinthians, a year ago, they were ready to give and excited about it. And you know what that did for the Macedonians? That encouraged them and got them excited. We want to give too. And now Paul says, verse 3, yet I have sent the brethren lest our boasting of you should be in vain in this respect, that as I said, you may be ready, lest if some Macedonians come with me and find you unprepared, we, not to mention you, should be ashamed of this confident boasting. Therefore I thought it necessary to exhort the brethren to go to you ahead of time and prepare your bountiful gift beforehand, which you had previously promised, that it may be ready as a matter of generosity and not grudging obligation. So he said, I told them about how excited you were about this, and we're about to come there. And then I got to thinking, what? What if you don't have it ready yet? That would be embarrassing. That's the reason why I'm sending this letter beforehand, to make sure that you do, because we're coming there. The Macedonians have been really excited, and part of their excitement came from hearing how excited you were. I know it'd be humiliating to you if showed up and you're like, oh, yeah, we were excited about that, but we never got it done. And so make sure to get it done.
So then he goes into the next part there, 6 and 7, I think with similar ideas. So whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. So when you're participating in this, you participate this in a way where you're trying to say, I am trying to help others. Not because Paul's writing and nagging us, but because I'm trying to help the needy brethren. I'm about to jump down to 12. Did you have anything to say between?
I just want to make one point here. What are some of the things that hinder you from giving? There's a need. You see the need. You would like to contribute to that. You feel some compulsion, positive zeal to do so. What are some things that hinder you? What are some of the things that come to your mind? We don't have enough set aside to do this. All right. Anything else? Selfishness? All right. Is that what you say to yourself? Is I'm selfish. Most of us, I won't have enough for myself. Okay. What if something happens? I'm not sure. All right. So that's exactly what I think most people think. Notice what he says in verse 8 or verse 7 and 8. So let each one give as he's purposed in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver. But then look at verse 8. And God is able to make all grace abound towards you, that you, always having all sufficiency in all things, may have an abundance for every good work. What is he saying there? That's right. May God take care of you so that you can take care of others. And when you take care of others, may he resupply you so that you have an abundance for yourself and continued giving. And I think that that's the challenge that we have, is we get right up to that point where we say, but I won't have enough. And what Paul is saying, God is able to take care of us in that. Out of it, show of hands here, and if you don't feel comfortable, come and talk to me afterwards. But I'm curious, has anybody in here ever given something and said, man, if I give this, I will not have enough and it will be very, very terrible for me? And you went ahead and gave it, and sure enough, you didn't have enough and it was very, very terrible for you. I understand if you don't want to raise your hand. Maybe that has happened to you, but I'll tell you this. I don't know that I've ever talked to anybody that that's been the case. I've talked to people that thought that would be the case. They went ahead and did it, expected that to be the case, and that wasn't the case at all. God did supply for them. And how God's going to do that, I don't want to go into all of that because I don't know all of that. But very rarely does someone give with the right heart and the right spirit, and it ends up just being devastating for them. And God tends to take care of those who take care of others. All right. Let's see here. And you notice in verse 10, the same idea. Now may he who supplies seed to the sower and bread and food supply. Excuse me. You think somebody would learn to turn that thing off? All right. Supply seed to the sower and bread for food supply, and multiply the seed you have sown and increase the fruits of your righteousness. So there's that same idea that God will reward you or resupply you. And what is the result of this in verse 11? If you do this, what happens when you are generous like that? What increases? What does that cause? When somebody gives you something, what does it create in you? You usually send what kind of card? A thank you card. It increases gratitude in the one that it's given to. And so here he's saying it causes thanksgiving. Who ultimately do you want the thanksgiving to go to? God. That's right. And so he's saying that this liberality causes thanksgiving through us to God. And you notice again in verse 12, but also the latter part of verse 12, but also this abounding through many thanksgivings to God. And so he hits upon that's the end result of this. And so you give, God supplies, it creates it meets the need, it creates a feeling of gratitude and thanksgiving, which gets sent back to the great giver. Anything you want to add? Anybody else? Yeah, that's right. Can't outgive God, is what she said. Yes. He is the great giver. All we have came from him. He tells us how to use it. And when we use it that way, he's well pleased and supplies us with the seed that we need to sow again. Very good. Anything else? Chapters 8 and 9? All right. We'll move on into chapter 10 then. Now, in chapters 10 through 13, Paul is going to, you can tell he's so uncomfortable in these chapters because he's having to do something that he shouldn't have to do, number one, and is totally out of character for him, number two, and is just really, really awkward. He's having to give them his credentials and talk about why he has authority as an apostle. Should he have to talk to the Corinthians about this? No. They should know who he is. They should have confidence in that. And I'll tell you the reason why he feels that he has to do this. He feels he has to do this because they kind of have the attitude that sometimes we have. We understand a person is important by what? Their title. All right, what else? Their presence. All right, ooh, yeah. Boy, you hear, he's got a commanding presence about him. Yes, that's right. How would you know who's in charge if you were to look at a bunch of people in uniform? By what? Yeah, that's right. How many medals do they have? How many stripes do they have? How many stars do they have? Whatever it is. And so there are these flashy things that the world learns to recognize. This is the one that's in charge here. This is the one that has authority. This is the one that we need to be listening to. And Paul came to them as an apostle, and he deals with this in 1 Corinthians, and he didn't come with them with a commanding presence. He came to them in humility and gentleness. And what's ended up happening is they begin to look at him as like, well, you know, he's just common folk. Now, these other teachers that have come in since Paul left, they have a commanding presence. I think they're real apostles. And so now Paul is hearing this, and he's having to write, and he's saying, I don't even want to do this. But what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to try to prove to you my authority from the Lord, and I shouldn't have to do that. And so it's a very uncomfortable situation for him. So you'll hear him say things in this section a lot like, I'm being foolish, but, or here, let me increase my folly here. And he's going to brag. That's what it feels like to him. It's like, I'm having to brag in order for you to understand who I am. Why does he have to do any of that? Or why is it important that they do come to understand who he is as an apostle? So they won't be led astray. First of all, they won't be listening to these false apostles. Second of all, that they will listen to the true word of God from him. And so that's the reason why this is necessary in this section. You want to start off, or you want me to?
Sure. So if you look in verse 1, he talks about he is humble when he's face to face to them, but he's bold toward them when he's away. What do you think he means when he says he's bold toward them when he's away? How would that look? Probably the letters, right? So you think about 1 Corinthians, the letter, he's pretty bold there, right? And telling them what to do, what not to do, how they're wrong, how they need to change. Pretty bold. And he talks about, I beg of you, when I am present, I may not have to show that kind of boldness with such confidence as I count on showing against someone who suspects us of walking according to the flesh. So he's hoping that when he shows up, he does not have to be exactly the way he was in his first letter. Which, by the way, he's already talked about that, I feel like, once or twice in this book. But he doesn't want to have to come with that kind of attitude. He even said in 1 Corinthians, you know, how do you want me to come to you? In rebuke or in, maybe it's grace, I don't remember exactly, the gentleness. Is in rebuke or gentleness? And, you know, how do you want me to come to you? Well, apparently, he had not really been super hard on them when he was there. In his letters, he's pretty hard on them. He said, what do you want it to be like when I actually show up again? Now, we are walking in the flesh, he says in verse 3, but we're not waging a war according to the flesh. In verse 5, what we do is we destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ, and be ready to punish every disobedience when your obedience is complete. And so what you see he's talking about here is like, look, I'll be bold. But why is he going to be bold? I think this is the key. There are things to fix because they're not glorifying God the way they ought to. So we destroy arguments raised against the knowledge of God. We take every thought captive to obey Christ, and we're ready to punish every disobedience. And so what he's saying is like, look, I'm going to be bold, but it's not for my sake, right? It's not to defend Paul necessarily. It's to defend how you should be obeying Christ. And what you see is that they're not doing that kind of thing. I probably am going to jump down a little bit, maybe to verse 12. So he talks about how he does not really want to boast of his own authority. He doesn't really want to compare himself in verse 12 with some of those who are commending themselves. When they measure themselves by one another, they compare themselves with one another, they are without understanding. So you look at this and you can kind of understand what's going on here, right? So you have people who want to be prominent. Well, how do you feel like you make yourself prominent? What's one way you can accomplish that?
I'm the best.
Yeah, I'm better than other people. I put them down and I look better, right? I think that's kind of what's going on here. And in fact, I think one of the people they're trying to put down is Paul himself. And they think by putting him down, questioning his apostleship, his authority, then that elevates them themselves. Notice what he is willing to boast in in 15 through really the end, maybe 13 through the end of the chapter, he talks about we won't boast beyond our limits, but we're only going to boast with regard to the area of influence God has assigned us to even reach to you. So when he's talking about what they're going to boast in, it's in what God has done through them, right? It's not in his own power. It's not in his own might, in his own presence. We used that word earlier. It's not in those things. It's through what God is able to accomplish through him. And then verse 15 repeats that idea. But our hope is that your faith increases in our area of influence among you may be greatly enlarged, so we may preach the gospel in lands beyond you. So verse 17, let the one who boast in the Lord. For it is not the one who commends himself who is approved, but the one who the Lord commends. So you have these teachers who are in Corinth, and they are commending themselves. They're comparing each other to themselves, to one another, to make themselves look better. So, hey, I'm great because I'm better than this guy. Look at what that guy's doing. That's not what Paul's going to do. Paul's going to say, look at the influence that Christ has had through us. And that's where he's going to boast, is in the Lord, not in himself.
So look at chapter 11, verse 1. Oh, that you would bear with me in a little folly. So just put up with this, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to brag a little bit so that you can understand my credentials. And the reason that I'm doing this, verse 2, I'm jealous for you with a godly jealousy, for I have betrothed you to one husband, that I may present you as a chaste virgin to Christ. But I fear lest somehow, as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, so your mind may be corrupted from the simplicity or the single-mindedness that is in Christ. For if he who comes preaches another Jesus whom we have not preached, or if you receive a different spirit which you have not received, or a different gospel which you have not accepted, you may well put up with it. The reason that I'm having to state my credentials as an apostle is because you're accepting all these false apostles that are coming in. And so, verse 5, I consider that I am not at all inferior to the most eminent apostles. Even though I am untrained in speech, yet I am not in knowledge. But if I have been thoroughly made manifest among you in all of these things, did I commit sin in abasing myself, that you may be exalted? Because I preach the gospel of God to you free of charge. I rob other churches, taking wages of them to minister to you. And when I was present with you and in need, I was a burden to no one. For what was lacking to me, the brethren who came from Macedonia supplied. And in everything I kept myself from being burdensome to you, so I will keep myself. All right. When an important official comes, what does everybody do? They take care of him. He's invited to come and eat here, and everything is supplied for him. When Paul came in, is that how the Corinthians treated him? Did he say, all right, get everything ready. Make sure that I'm taken care of. All of my needs are met. No. And so what did they end up assuming about him? Oh, he must not be important. Yeah, he's not making any demands like that. He must not be important. Why was he not making any demands like that? That's right. He didn't want to be a burden. So the more that he served them, the more that they just looked at him and said, oh, well, he's just a servant. He's not an apostle. He's just a servant. And so their problem is they're not recognizing what Jesus taught at the very beginning. Whoever will be great among you, what? Let him be a servant. The lords of the Gentiles, the rulers of the Gentiles, they lord over one another. Let it not be so among you. Paul practiced that, and the Corinthians, because they were carnally minded, 1 Corinthians, couldn't grasp that. They misinterpreted that. And so Paul is having to explain this. Verse 12. But what I do, I will also continue to do, that I may cut off the opportunity of those who desire an opportunity to be regarded just as we are in the things of which they boast. For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light. Therefore, it is no great thing if his ministers also transform themselves into ministers of righteousness, whose end will be according to their works. And so I'm having to do all this because there are those coming in who are willing to exalt themselves, and you are willing to think of them as exalted because they come in and they teach. Well, let me ask you this. How do false teachers teach? They tell you what you want to hear. Is everything that they say false? No, probably the majority of it's true. It looks good. They speak a lot of truth, but then they slip in beside it, in the middle of it, something that is erroneous. And Paul is saying, and you're just eating it up. You're just eating it up. So I'm concerned about you on that. So verse 18, seeing that many boast according to the flesh, I will also boast. For you put up with fools gladly, since you yourselves are wise. For you put up with it if one brings you into bondage, if one devours you, if he takes from you, if he exalts himself, if one strikes you on the face, to our shame. I say that we were too weak for that. But in whatever anyone is bold, I speak foolishly, I am bold also. Do you see what Paul's using sarcasm here? These false teachers come in and they just take from you and abuse you, and you put up with that. We were too weak to do that. I speak foolishly. I'll be bold also. Are they Hebrews? I am also. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I more. And then he goes through and he talks about, I have done all of these things, and labors more abundantly, and stripes above measure, in prison more frequently, and death often from the Jews. And then he goes through and he talks about the beatings that he received and the shipwrecks that he was in, and all of these things, and plus his concern for the churches. Verse 30, if I must boast, I will boast in the things which concern my infirmity. The God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who is blessed forever, knows that I am not lying. If you were really wanting to look and say, who is an apostle from the Lord, would you look at someone who comes in with great commanding presence, or one who has given their life to serve the Lord? And Paul says, if I'm going to boast in the things that I've given my life to serve the Lord. And so he gives that list there. And he feels silly even doing that. Does that make sense? Thoughts, comments on that?
I think at one time he would have, his physical presence declined so much. I think he was a young man there. They closed when Stephen was killed. He takes the letters from Damascus, goes around. Of course, then he's preaching and all after he's converted. His physical being has just been wrecked there in verse 10 of chapter 10. Bodily presence this week speaks temple. Then he explains that these things, this is why beaten, so on and so forth. And he's just, if you're looking at it physically, he's just gone downhill, and it really hasn't been that long. That's how many years it's been. But
right.
He's just, as you said, given his life, and now he's having to defend.
Yeah.
He's not excellent in speech. He's not. It's just worn him out, and then whatever that thorn in the flesh is.
Yeah.
He's prayed that will lift it.
Right.
So he had that presence at one point. He doesn't anymore.
That's an interesting point. Very good. Any other thoughts?
You mentioned they could come in with this commanding presence. I understand that. Maybe some of them may not have commanding presence, but they may have made promises that are not.
Yes. Yes.
And does that happen today?
Yes.
Well,
Yes. If you can't hear what Timmy's saying, he's saying some may not have had commanding presence, but they came in with commanding promises of whatever, telling people what they wanted to hear, as Sherry said earlier, promising health and wealth and whatever, but all the while taking advantage of them. Yeah, that's right. That's right. All right.
All right, so in chapter 12, he opens up, and we're going to move through this a little bit quickly. A couple things I want to point out, though. He opens up with the idea, and he talks about he knows a man who had visions, right? What did he have visions of?
Things that couldn't be spoken of.
Yeah, but he talks about it a little bit here. So he talks about being caught up to the third heaven, caught up into paradise. He says, whether in the body or out of the body, I don't know. But he has these visions and revelations. And in verse 5, he says, on behalf of this man, I will boast, but on my own behalf, I won't boast except of my weakness. So again, there's something here that he could boast in. But what is he choosing to boast in? In his Weakness. Same thing that he had in in chapter 11. In verse 7, I think this is where we're going to get why he's so adamant about saying this. Larson mentioned this morning. Verse 7, to keep me from being conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh. Which, by the way, if he's talking about being conceited in the revelations and the thorn was given to him, who might he be talking about with these revelations? Possibly himself, yes? It's possible. He doesn't say that, but it could be himself.
I think it's heavily implied that he's talking about himself. Yeah.
Especially with, I think this is the verse that probably would.
And let me just say this. How many prophets can you think of that were called up to the third heaven? In other words, called up before God's throne? Old and New Testament. John in the New Testament. Isaiah, the Old Testament. Maybe a couple of others. What I'm saying is very, very few. He's in a very elite group here. This, God allowing him to experience this puts him in a very elite group of prophets. And so that's the reason why he brings this up. And he says, but I don't use that as a club to go around and say, hey, you need to listen to me. And so.
So he's given a thorn in the flesh. And again, we've talked about this idea before about what it could possibly be. It could be his vision. It could be something else. We know he pleaded 3 times to the Lord about this. So he's pretty fervent about this. What's the answer? The answer is no. He said to me in verse 9, my grace is sufficient for you, and my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then I am content with my weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Now, this is where I'd like to say something for just a couple minutes. The idea that God's power is made perfect in weakness. There are 2 things I think that we can maybe point to with that. The beginning of 1 Corinthians, we talked about a very similar idea. We talked about how people looked at Jesus' sacrifice as foolishness and as weakness. And yet what it consistently said in those first 3 or 4 chapters is that that was God's power to save. That was God's power to save. So God's power is made perfect in weakness. And I think you see that with Jesus. But then secondly, if we go back, you can do this real quick, just go back to chapter 1. We didn't read this verse whenever we were in class last time, but in chapter 1 of 2 Corinthians verse 9, he's been talking about the afflictions he's going through, the hardships he's going through. And notice what he says at the end of verse 9. But that was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. I think another aspect of this is that idea that when we are weak, when we're going through afflictions or we have, a thorn in the flesh, where do we look? We look to God, right? We look to God. And then whenever we seek him, whenever we follow him, that's when his power can have actual effect, right? That's when his power can be made perfect in somebody, is if they're weak and they realize they need God and not to rely on themselves. And we're using this language, not to commend themselves, right? Not to think too highly of themselves, but they rely on God. And I think both of those ideas come out in this verse when Paul is having to deal with this. And he's having, in some ways, he's impossible. He's having to learn a lesson here, even if he's already been working for God in so many ways. He's still having to learn to rely on him.
So in verse 15, I think he just summarizes a lot of what he's been saying in these last few chapters. I will very gladly be spent, or will spend and be spent for your souls. Though the more abundantly I love you, what? The less I'm loved. So I'm giving myself to you. All the weakness that I came to you in was for your benefit, and yet I see that all it did was make you think less of me. So verse 20, here's his concern. For I fear lest when I come I shall not find you as I wish, and that I shall not be found by you such as you wish, lest there be contentions, jealousy, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, backbiting, whispers, conceits, tumults, and lest when I come again, my God will humble me among you, and I shall mourn for many who have sinned before and have not repented of the uncleanness, fornication, licentiousness, which they have practiced. So he's saying, my concern is I'm going to show up there and things are not going to be taken care of the way they need to be. And rather this being a very happy reunion, this is going to be one where I'm having to chastise you. So verse 5, of chapter 13, examine yourself as to whether you are in the faith. Prove yourself. And so here's this call to self-examination.
Can I say something real quick?
Sure, yeah.
In verse 4, that's the idea I was trying to highlight. For he was crucified in weakness, but lives by the power of God. For we are also weak in him, but dealing with you, we will live with him by the power of God. The idea that Jesus' sacrifice was the weakness that leads to that, it results in power. And so that's why you should examine yourself.
And then kind of a summary, verse 10. Therefore, I write these things being absent, lest being present, I should use sharpness according to the authority which the Lord has given me for edification and not for destruction. So I have authority, but I want to use it in such a way that it builds up, and I don't want to use it with sharpness. And so that's the reason why I'm writing these things now. So verse 11, finally, brethren, farewell, become complete, be of good comfort, be of one mind, live in peace, and the God of love and peace will be with you. And so here's his concern. As we said, 2 Corinthians, by far the most emotional letter that Paul writes. And you can see that he is distraught over some things, rejoices over others, so glad that they're making the corrections that he's heard they're making, but then also very distraught over the fact that maybe they're not thinking of him in the way that they should. And he's afraid that what that's going to end up in is they're going to tolerate false teachers, and then he's going to have to be extra hard on them when he gets there. So that's a summary of 2 Corinthians. You feel like you got a little bit of that in mind? There'll be a quiz on this later, so I'll come back and ask you if you got it. Thank you for your good attention.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.